The trial on Paul Manafort continues, and recently, an important witness finally had offered his testimony. Now, this witness, of course, is somebody who was very close to Paul Manafort, which could spell trouble. Now, according to the New York Times, Rick Gates, Manafort's right-hand man for years, actually had begun testifying against his former boss on Monday in federal court in Virginia. Now, he is considered one of the most important, or the most important witness in Mr. Manafort's trial on tax and bank fraud charges. So, what this is that this case is basically, make or break for Manafort, right? So, and the reason that Gates is so important is because Gates worked with him very closely in his activities. So he is the star witness, and of course that could offer problems for the prosecution, so as well as the defense. So, first, what did Gates have to say? Well, when asked by prosecutors whether he was involved in any criminal activity with Mr. Manafort, Gates had actually responded with one word: yes. Mr. Gates also testified that he and Mr. Manafort had held 15 foreign bank accounts that were not disclosed by the federal government, and Mr. Gates said the required financial filings were not submitted at Mr. Manafort's direction. So, basically, he was instructed by Paul Manafort to not tell the government about these different bank accounts, which a lot of his money had been going into. Not only that, but they operated shell companies as well in order to help launder money. So, what else is there? Well, it turns out there's more. Now, Gates himself had admitted to a wide variety of crimes working under Manafort, including bank fraud, tax fraud, money laundering, lying to federal authorities, lying in a courtroom deposition, and on top of that, and this is probably the best part, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from Paul Manafort by falsely claiming expenses. Oh, yeah, Paul, looks like we've got an extra unexpected expense. I'm just going to have to divert $20,000 to my account. Okay, cool, great. And he just takes it and he puts that money in his pocket. So not only did he lie to the government, do bank fraud, he lied to banks too, lied to the government, did money laundering, and he also stole from his boss. Their corruption knows no bounds. And it does really kind of show you the caliber of people involved and or involved with and or around Donald Trump. Remember, Gates was deputy campaign manager throughout the election. So he was part of an official part of the Donald Trump campaign. So that's disastrous. Now, speaking of Trump, again, it's not really directly tied with Donald Trump, as Gates, of course, has pled guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and lying to federal authorities. And, of course, Manafort also faces a lot of charges, but Trump isn't necessarily named in this suit. He is still involved, though, because Manafort was Trump's campaign chairman, and I think the whole purpose of bringing Manafort to trial, not only, of course, to go after the charges of all that stuff that he actually did wrong, but one of the purposes is to get Manafort to flip on Donald Trump. Now, Gates has already flipped on Manafort, as you've seen, and Gates actually also worked on the campaign as a liaison to the Republican National Committee. So he had a very important position with the with the Trump campaign as liaison to the RNC during the election. And of course, Manafort was campaign chair for at least, I think, the first 6 months. Now, it also matters because the trial is stemming from charges brought by the special counsel, Robert Mueller. Now, Mueller is investigating Russia's attempts to influence the 2016 election. Now, New York Times explains that Mr. Manafort, as Mr. Manafort's most trusted aide, Gates was privy to detailed information about Mr. Manafort's personal and business associates, including exactly how much he paid for his season sports tickets. Now, again, that seems like a trivial, minute detail, but in reality, you can glean a lot of information from that, basically saying that how much he actually knows about Manafort and his expenses. So if he could point down season tickets, then he could point out any of the actual really corrupt deals that were made by Manafort. Now, they also, prosecutors also allege that Mr. Gates, with Mr. Manafort's blessing, repeatedly lied to Manafort's accountants about millions of dollars in income that Manafort held in the names of shell companies in Cyprus and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They also claim that Mr. Gates helped Manafort fraudulently obtain millions in bank loans back in 2015 and 2016. So those are some very serious charges. Gates himself faces a possibility of 6 years in prison, and Manafort is facing decades, possibly. So for all the stuff that he's alleged to have done. So now in comes Robert Mueller, right? This is the first trial related to the Mueller investigation, because it was through this investigation that we found out about this alleged money laundering, alleged tax fraud, and all that stuff from Paul Manafort. So the thing is what they're trying to do is that they're trying to put as much pressure on Paul Manafort as they can to have him flip on Donald Trump. Now, that's the thing, right? So if he has information, it could be very useful to the Russia investigation. If he does not have information, but here's the thing, they wouldn't put the screws to him. They wouldn't put so much pressure on Manafort to flip if he did not have information. And Manafort has so far refused to flip, even though it looks like there's a lot of evidence so far against him. And here's where the problem of Rick Gates comes into play. So he possibly knows all this information. On one hand, that is potentially useful information. On the other hand, here you have Rick Gates, who doesn't seem to be a very trustworthy character. So, I mean, this guy is so corrupt, he steals from his boss. So he's not a trustworthy person. He's kind of a snake. But not only that, but Manafort's also a snake. And a lot of people surrounding themselves with Donald Trump, or I should say a lot of the people that Donald Trump surrounded himself with, and the kind of people that he hung out with and that he worked with, they're also snakes. And these people are gross. They're liars, cheats, and allegedly thieves. So we're going to kind of have to see how this plays out as the trial continues. But if you want my estimate, what I think is going to happen, I do believe that Manafort is a snake, but I also believe that Donald Trump will not allow Manafort to be in prison if it's possible. So here's the possibility of me saying that there's a possibility of a pardon in the future if Manafort happens to be found guilty. And that really kind of depends on whether the jury will believe Rick Gates or not. And so it kind of hinges on his credibility, and that credibility is really low. So it really could kind of go either way in this, and it depends really on the evidence that they will bring to trial. And so, again, we will have to see, but it is very interesting to watch and see what happens and how this will impact the White House. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.